Welcome to AntArctic Stories, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes into the rich world of people who live, work, and undertake daring expeditions in the polar regions. My name is Heather Thorkelson, and I'll be your host today. Mikolaj Golachowski was born and still lives in Warsaw, Poland. A biologist by education, he's had a lifelong passion for both natural and exploration history. His childhood love of and fascination with cold regions was confirmed while he was studying the behavioral and genetic ecology of various carnivores in the winter forests of northeast Poland. In 2002, he defended his PhD in Poland and then went on his first overwintering expedition to the Polish Antarctic station Henryk Arctowski as a scientist, where he studied the reproductive strategies and genetics of southern elephant seals. After that, he returned 3 more times to work at Arctowski, including another year-long expedition in which he worked as the base commander and leader of the 32nd expedition. Mikolaj began his work on expedition ships in 2006, which enabled him to happily share his enthusiasm and knowledge of Antarctic and Arctic nature and history, working as either the marine mammal expert or historian on board. When not on an expedition ship, Miko spends his time caring for his daughter, Hanagaya, and their motley crew of creatures, including a couple of cats and an introverted tortoise. He works as a translator and author of books and articles on ecology, nature conservation, and history. Welcome, Miko, to the show. We're really excited to have you on AntArctic Stories.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
And you're calling in from Poland today, correct?
Yes, I am in Poland indeed.
Excellent. So I'm really excited to ask you about your experience working on the research station in Antarctica. Obviously, you have a lot of different stories to share, I'm sure, because you worked there over the course of 7 years on 4 different deployments. So can you tell us, how did you get the opportunity to work at Arctowski Station?
Well, I'm a biologist, and I used to work as a scientist in Poland. I was employed by the University of Warsaw. And then upon completing my PhD, I thought I would try something new. And I had already had some friends that had been to Antarctica, so that was always on my mind. And anyway, I was always tempted by very cold regions because I like it when it's cold. So I thought, well, I need to find a project that would get me there. And as I had been working with carnivores previously, and especially behavioral ecology, which is why the animals do the things they do, and of this, in particular, I was interested in breeding strategies. It all made sense for me to start working on elephant seals because they have some of the most exciting strategies of all animals. So I thought of this project. I went to the Department of Antarctic Biology, Polish Academy of Sciences, thinking that this would be just one expedition and that's it. But I presented that project. I said I'm very happy and ready to go there for a year, which at that time, that was 17 years ago. So at that time, there were not so many people that would be willing to go away for a year. So that was a strong argument already. They liked my project too. And they decided to send me to the station. After the first year at the station, when I returned home, they offered me a permanent position at the Department of Antarctic Biology, so I could continue with my studies. And this is why I took part in 3 more expeditions after that.
Okay, so it was an opportunity to continue with the research that you had started in your first full year.
Yeah. Basically, when I was going there for the first time, I did not expect that there would be a permanent employment involved. I thought this is just one adventure, but I still needed a sort of scientific excuse to get there. That's why the project was started. But the project turned out to be reasonably interesting, and they quite liked my work, so that's why they employed me.
So not knowing that you would have the opportunity to go back, what was it like after spending a year in Antarctica and then leaving, thinking, that's it, I'm done, it's my time, my adventure's over?
It was a very special time for me because my mother was terminally sick, which I found out when I was in Antarctica. So I had sort of other things on my mind. But I do remember when I was seeing my field working area for the last time. It's a beautiful place called Paradise Cove, and that definitely deserves its name. And I remember you have to hike across the mountains to get there from the station. It's about 10 or 11 kilometers.
Wow.
So I remember the last time I climbed those mountains and looked down on the Paradise Cove, I thought that this may be the last time I see it. And yes, that was kind of heartbreaking. But and then sailing away from Antarctica, well, I didn't actually sail away. I was taken by the military plane from the Chilean Navy, and I had already other things on my mind because I was rushing home to meet my mother. But basically, those thoughts were there, yes. It was very strange to think that I may not be coming back to Antarctica, although my instincts were actually telling me that this is not the case, that one way or another I will come back.
Right. And 17 years later, you're still going back.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty awesome. So you mentioned the Chilean base, and Arctowski is located on King George Island. So there's a lot of other stations there. You've got Argentina, Brazil, China, Peru. There's numerous, all doing, various degrees of research in a lot of different fields. Did you have much communication with other bases while you were stationed at Arctowski?
Yes. There are certain stations with which we are in very close contact. In our case, as Arctowski is located in a place called Admiralty Bay on King George Island, and there's one more permanent station in our bay, which is the Brazilian station, Ferraz, Comandante Ferraz. So naturally, these are our closest partners. I didn't cooperate with them scientifically because they were doing completely other stuff. But quite often in the field, I would work together with people from the US summer camp called Peter J. Lenny, actually officially, but everybody calls them Copacabana. They are our nearest neighbors. They're only 6 kilometers away on the other side of the glacier. However, they're there just for the summer. So during the summer, the ties are very strong. Because they're just a simple summer camp, they come to Arctowski every week to have a shower, to wash their clothes, and so on. We actually have designated one of our buildings. We call it the American House, and we don't even go there. It's theirs. So we don't really even treat them as neighbors. We treat them as our people on the other side of the glacier. But so in summary, whenever we can cooperate during field work, we do that. We help them, they help us, and that's absolutely typical. But they're gone by the end of February or in March. That's when we are by ourselves. But we do have other contacts with other bases. For example, for postal service, we rely on the Chileans. The Chileans have the largest base on our island, so they would deliver our mail. At that time, when I started working there, we didn't have internet, so it was just a snail mail, the traditional mail that we were reliant upon, and that would be provided by the Chileans. We also had contacts with the Argentinians and pretty much with everybody on the island, even though it's a big island.
And what would you do in the case of a medical emergency from where you were based?
That's again all down to cooperation. Basically, every station has some medical facilities, but they're very simple. And we did have a doctor on both of my expeditions, but it really is a tiny medical center. Like, yes, if you cut your finger, they can help you. Or if the highlight of it in its history was that there were some appendectomies performed in that room.
Oh wow, appendectomy!
But that was back in the 1980s, and there were 2 of those. Otherwise, yeah, they could see if you have fractured your bone or did something relatively simple. If the case is getting more complicated, then every station has a doctor. So they are all from different specialities. So we can call somebody who deals with that particular issue. Then the Chileans have a fully operational hospital. Again, small, but you can perform most of the typical medical proceedings there. So if the problem is severe enough, you can send somebody to the Chileans. And if it's still summer or spring or autumn, then these people can be evacuated back home with the help of the Chilean Navy or Air Force. So basically, a plane would take them back to Chile, and then either they would end up in a hospital in South America or go back to Poland.
But not the case in winter, obviously.
Not in winter, no. So basically, between May 25th and about the 3rd of September, there's no way to leave the island.
So language-wise, if you're potentially calling up another base and saying, hey, you guys have a doctor who specializes in X, we need him to come and check out this person who's injured or has a medical problem, is English a commonly spoken language amongst base staff, or is it a bit of a wild card?
I would say it's a bit of a mixture, but Polish people, we are quite fortunate because nobody in the world speaks our language, so we have to learn other languages. And when I was at school, it was obligatory for us to learn Russian. So people my age will have been exposed to Russian. I don't say that everybody my age speaks Russian in my country, but as it happens, I do, and many of my older colleagues do. So if we communicate with Bellingshausen, it's in Russian. Then at every station, there is somebody with at least some degree of English. So English is the official, it's not, I wouldn't say it's an official language of the island, but you could communicate in English. However, most of the stations on our island are from South America, so Spanish would be the most common language. And it's also, even when I talk to the Brazilians, who obviously speak Portuguese in their own country, Spanish and Portuguese are similar enough so that we could communicate in Spanish. So all those languages are very useful.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that, there was no email at the time. You were reliant on snail mail. Obviously, Skype didn't exist. I mean, this is long before you could do anything like that. So
Skype may have existed by the time, but it's just that we didn't have an internet connection at the station. Because we could check our emails when we visited the Brazilians, for example. They were much more civilized than us, much more advanced. But if I remember, maybe even during my first expedition, we had the option of sending and receiving emails via the satellite phone, which was stupidly expensive, but it could be done. There was obviously no web browsing, nothing like this. We couldn't do what we are doing now, but nowadays it is fully possible. There is Wi-Fi at the station and there is a fast connection. But that was not when I was working there. When I finished working at the station in 2008, I believe, once I left the station, they installed the internet 10 days after I left.
No way.
I'm the last person in the history of Arctowski whose phone bill was higher than his salary at the station. I kind of like talking, and we had an allowance of, if I remember correctly, 9 minutes for the satellite phone a month, and that's not that much. So I obviously always exceeded that.
Wow, that's a really different world.
Yeah. But it was good. There is, I think, an interesting sort of thread here, because later on my last expedition, I was the base commander. So there were other issues that I had to relate to. And I remember talking to the base commander of the South Korean station, King Sejong, and they had a very fast internet connection, as you can probably guess. And he said that a funny thing happened when they installed the internet at the station, because they realized, he wasn't the first to realize that, but some of his predecessors realized that people don't know each other, because when they are at the station, they would be working somewhere in the workshop or maybe in the lab or wherever. And then after that, they would go back to their cabins and then just communicate on Skype or whatever it was at the time, and spend their time connecting with their family instead of connecting with their colleagues at the station. And obviously, we live in a potentially dangerous place. We need to know each other to be able to work together and to be able to save each other's lives and so forth. So basically, what he did, he had an obligatory film watching session every night. So at 8:00 p.m., everybody from the station had to get back into the common room to watch a film together. And it wasn't the film that was important, it was just the interaction between humans, because it's easy if you have fast communication to forget where you really are. And at the station, obviously, yes, as I said, it is potentially a dangerous place. So you have to be able to work in the physical environment in which we are, not just in virtual reality. So, and this is precisely what I did at my station as well, even though our communications was not so good, but we also had those obligatory sort of film watching events.
That's a really, really smart idea and a good way to combat that sort of addiction to technology and virtual communication and whatnot. Absolutely. And, you and I met working on ships, and I started working on ships in an era where ships barely had internet. I mean, we technically had internet, but it never worked. And, guests often complain, oh, we're not connected. And I'm like, yeah, it's amazing.
That's
It
a
is
great thing.
so nice. You get 10 days of just being a human being and having conversations with other human beings. And oh man, I miss those days,
Absolutely.
Very unique. I mean, to say I had to go to Antarctica to actually get fully offline, that's quite something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we're lucky to have had this opportunity, though.
Yeah. So given that your communications were really limited and, you overwintered in your first season, what would you say were the most difficult sacrifices you had to make while being so remote? Was it you missed food? Was it being in more communication with people? Like, what was the sort of biggest obvious challenge?
Well, the obvious challenge in my case, during my first overwintering expedition, was the illness of my mother. Because I only found out exactly on the 25th of May when I went to see my Brazilian friends off on the last plane that was leaving our island. And this is when I also checked my mail, and this is how I found out. She only found out like a day earlier. So basically the timing was really bad. And then it was impossible to leave the island. And then I took the first plane to basically come and say goodbye. So that was obviously challenging, but that's not a typical situation, right? Otherwise, it was relatively easy. At that time, I didn't have my family, so now I see things completely differently. But at that time, I basically always thought that as long as everybody is more or less all right, I don't really have to see them very often. Like, it's maybe it's a sad event, but a guy that I consider my best friend, he only lives about 3 kilometers away from me, and I think the last time we saw each other was about half a year ago.
Wow.
But we've known each other since we were 7, and we'll always be best friends, and there's nothing that can destroy that. So I don't actually need to stay in touch with people as long as I know they're okay. So that was not a challenge, but for some it is. So there wasn't anybody that I would miss in a sort of romantic way at that time either. And again, that could be a very serious challenge, but it wasn't my case. So no, there was no sacrifice. Actually, I enjoyed every minute of it. I think that if there is a challenge there, and that can be probably said for all, is that you need to be patient with people, because when you get to that station, it's not like your trip that you would organize with your friends. You're going on an expedition, and everybody comes from a different sort of walk of life. They have different professions. They're of different age. They will have very different political views than you do, some of them at least. Like on my last expedition, that was quite ridiculous. When I was base commander, again, we were there for a year. One of my people, the ones that, on my first winter in 2002, 2003, there were 13 of us at the station. Because there's always more people in summer and then less in winter. However, on my second expedition, there were only 8 of us. One of those guys is more or less a neo-Nazi. He's a very nationalistic, homophobic, you name it, anti-feminist, very conservative in all his views and so on, so on, so on. However, at the same time, he was just about the best mechanic that ever arrived at the station. He was so amazingly talented that he could repair absolutely everything that got broken. So, in some ways, I can't imagine anybody being sort of farther away from me in terms of their views. Yeah. But at the same time, he was one of them, if not the most reliable member of the expedition. When it came to practical thinking, he was quick. He wasn't stupid. He was just completely strange in his ideas, but his brain was working, and he was quick to make decisions. He was efficient at what he was doing, and he was reasonably young and fit and so on. So he would be the first person I would call in an emergency. And as it happened, that's what happened also. We had an emergency, and he was the first person I would call. So you have to be able to realize that because you're stuck together, you cannot just walk away from somebody, In some ways you cannot communicate with them, but in some other ways you are all parts of the team. And that being the case, you need to be able to rely upon each other, even though you may personally not like each other.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because that was one of my questions. What happens when you don't get along with someone and you're stuck in this small environment? I mean, I guess it's really that you have to be, as you say, super patient and also find the commonalities, right?
Yes. I am generally a patient person, but I do have very strong political views and I do have very strong views in general. However, so like in Poland, it would be a very different story. We would not be communicating, or we would be maybe even fighting. But in that circumstance, we got along reasonably well, actually. We established that we are completely different in terms of our views on life, but that happened very, very early on. And then we both had the sort of reason in our heads to not to raise those topics.
And it's necessary, right? Because as you say, it can be a situation of survival because you're all interdependent on each other.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. It's so interesting to think about what that psychologically must be like. You're stuck in this tiny environment with these people. So let's talk a little bit about overwintering briefly. I'm curious in two ways. Overwintering with other human beings, because as you say, there's less people when you overwinter. So if one of them happens to be one that's like diametrically opposed to you, then that can be a challenge. But also, like, what are the research benefits around staying overwinter, or if any? I mean, what's the decision to stay overwinter from your work perspective?
Well, as you can imagine, in winter there are less things to study, basically, right?
Yeah.
If you're a geologist, then all your rocks are covered by snow and ice.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a zoologist, then most of your animals are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, the daylight lasts for only about 4 hours, because Polish station, you have to remember, is still north of the Antarctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
Antarctica is so much bigger than the Arctic that actually it sort of starts earlier. So it is proper Antarctica, but we are still further north than the southern circle, which means that in winter we did have a few hours of daylight, but not too many. So there's less to do in terms of studying, although there are some monitoring programs. So throughout the year, you go out and, I don't know, count the seals or count the penguins if you find any, or measure the glaciers and so on and so on. There are certain scientific projects that require year-round work. Another incentive for leaving the station operational during winter is that it's so much easier to keep it operational rather than restart it every year. And without the maintenance, it would possibly fall to pieces in the meantime, and so on and so on. So there is a reason why there are people there in the winter. Also, like for scientists, I would gather all my samples in summer, and then in winter I could analyze them. So it wasn't a time wasted. But obviously, yes, there is less to study. There's only a limited amount of sort of maintenance work you can do at the station when you're a technician, and so on. But yes, there are things to do. Not so many, and that's why overwintering is such a great personal experience, because you get to do a lot of things that you never had the time for, like read all the books that you always wanted to read, right?
Yeah.
Or learn languages, whatever. And it's it's actually amazing how many talents are discovered during overwintering.
Huh.
Admittedly, many of them would have been better off undiscovered, probably, because like it's an amazing amount of really bad poetry and terrible paintings that are created at Antarctic stations during winter. But that's just as well, because we're not doing it to impress anybody. If people feel that this way of expressing themselves suits them, and if people feel like doing it, great. That's a perfect opportunity for it.
Yeah, and what a rare opportunity to not be inundated with other priorities that are taking up that space.
Absolutely.
Like you literally just have all this creative space to do what you want, right?
Unlike when you live somewhere else, at the station, one of the great things is that basically from your personal point of view, you don't need to worry about anything. Like what I appreciate about Antarctica is that your problems are really simplified, because the main challenge is don't die today. And if you manage to meet that challenge, you don't really have to worry about what you'll be eating, where you'll be living, and what will you be wearing, and so on and so on, because this is all provided for. There are no shops that would tempt you, and nothing to worry about, really. So for a year, you once you accept that nature is much stronger than you are, and that yes, if you do something stupid, you will die, simple as that, then actually living there is reasonably easy. Like if you're patient with people and if you can accept the environment as it is rather than try to fight it, then most of the problems that we face at home, we don't have those problems in Antarctica, especially without the internet. You don't even have to argue with anybody on Facebook if you don't have Facebook.
That's appealing to a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I absolutely loved all of my expeditions. And yes, I would not do it again because now I have a daughter and I just wouldn't leave her for that long. But I'm super happy to have been there and to have done it in the past.
Yeah. And the way that you describe it, it makes absolute sense that there are people at some of the larger stations that go season after season. I mean, they've been living basically at an Antarctic base for the last 15 years or something, because that's the environment in which they thrive, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, let me give you an example. It happened to me, I think, 3 times after my first expedition. So I had just spent a year in Antarctica, right? I went back to Poland. I met this girl and I invited her for dinner. And we left in very good mood from the restaurant. And then the waiter chased me down, really like exploding with anger because I forgot to pay. Because, for a year, I didn't have to use money. I had the money on me. I just didn't have the instinct to take it out of my pocket. Obviously, she was laughing at me because she had already knew that was the case. I was super embarrassed. The waiter was super angry. And I remember saying to him, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I've just been to Antarctica for a year, so I forgot." And then I thought, what a lame excuse that was. But that actually made me happy in a way. Like, of course, I overtipped him and did all this. And as I say, I was super embarrassed. But after that, in a sort of afterthought, I thought, well, if you can actually forget that there is money and there's need for it, then if that's not freedom, I'm not sure what is.
I love that story. Well, I want to go back for a second because you did say, the main priority on a daily basis is don't get killed, right? Like, don't die. Don't make a stupid decision. Don't die. And I have heard you tell the story of coming across that glacier back from Paradise Cove, if I remember correctly, and falling into a crevasse when you were by yourself. So I would love it if you would share that story with us.
Okay, so I'll give a bit of an introduction. During the 4 expeditions that I was working at the station, every time I was there, somebody died. Not at my station, but on one of the surrounding stations.
Oh my gosh.
What I find the most interesting about this is that always these were people with a lot of experience. Like, most extreme case, it was an Argentinian guy who had 12 winters behind him in Antarctica. And basically, this is one of the things I love about Antarctica, is that it teaches you how to be humble in face of nature. And the moment you become arrogant, the moment you become too cocky, too sure of yourself, the moment you start believing that you know everything and you're invincible, and you have such great experience and great skills and great equipment, this is when you can easily die. Because the people who come there for the first time, they're too overwhelmed and they don't do anything, which also means they don't do anything stupid.
Yeah.
Because they're just overwhelmed. Whereas if you make yourself comfortable in Antarctica, expedition number 4, I'm still doing quite well. I know my stuff. This is when you can die. And this is precisely what happened to me. I was returning from my field station to the main base, and absolutely stupidly, but at that time it didn't seem so stupid. Like, I've got this problem that's a sort of personal problem. I hate bothering people. I'd rather do everything by myself. We have a rule that you cannot cross the glacier by yourself. So basically, as I approached from Paradise Cove, there is a glacier that I have to cross, and I had crossed that glacier in my life maybe 60 times or more, but always with somebody. So the rule is that, okay, I'm here on this side of the glacier, I'm calling my station, and then they're sending 2 people to pick me up because they cannot send one for the same reason, right? So the 2 people come across, pick me up, and the three of us go back, right? We only have 8 people at the station, right, at that time. Okay, so, but that's what I did. I called them, and the guy that sort of volunteered, not that there was much choice, but the guy that volunteered for this mission was not the nationalistic guy I described before, because he was very busy, but somebody else who was also young and fit, but had a very strong personal problem with me. So at the sort of earliest opportunity, he was happy enough to announce that, oh no, sorry, there's no passage here. And the people that he took to accompany him were Brazilians that had just arrived in Antarctica. For them, it was the first walk on the glacier at all. So they were, again, overwhelmed. So he, as I said, he was, I think, quite happy to say, no, sorry, Miko, I need to go back to Copacabana and spend the night there because we cannot get to you to pick you up. I thought, oh, wait, you know. I was the base commander, so I had just been to the field for about 4 or 5 days. It was towards the end of the expedition. There was a lot of paperwork and all sorts of things. So I thought I had very good reasons to go back. And also I had just been in the field, so I wanted a shower, basically. That winter, there was not too much snow. So I sort of sat on a moraine with my binoculars, looking at the glacier, and I could easily see a path sort of winding amongst those crevices that led me to the top of the glacier. And you know what they're shaped like a dome, right? So basically, I could, being on one side of it, I couldn't see the whole glacier. I could only see up to the top. And then at the bottom of it, I could see that there is a path leading to the moraines on our side of the glacier. But there was this blind spot just after the curve. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it. You know, I've done it loads of times before, just not by myself. So I started walking, and I managed to successfully get to the top of the glacier. And then as I was descending, I found myself in the field of ice, which was of snow. Because like when there's no snow and you can see the crevasses, that's safe, because then you're not going to fall into them unless you're really stupid. And you can jump across them, you can walk around them, no problem. You're on solid ice, you're safe. The problem is when there is a lot of snow and you can't see them. So this is when you can fall in.
Right.
So basically, as I was descending on the other side of the glacier, I got to this area covered in snow, which was really small. It was like maybe 5 meters across, maybe 7 meters across, something like this. However, so basically just too wide to jump across. And it was very frustrating because behind this area, I could see the icy path going down to the other side of the glacier. However, here where I was, wherever I put my poles in the snow, I was still on the solid ice, but wherever I put my poles, there was a crevasse. So, and I couldn't see where the crevasse ended and so on. So, okay, there's no way I can get across this. I have to go back. So I retraced my footsteps, and there was this big crevasse that I had jumped across a few minutes earlier, but that time I was jumping while descending, so from a higher ground to a lower ground. Now I was going back, so I had to jump across the same crevasse, but the wrong way around.
Oh my God.
From a lower ground to the higher ground.
Yeah.
So jump I did, and I made it to the other side, but I slipped down, and I remember sort of hanging to the ice, which was, as I say, I was coming from downwards to upwards, right? So the ice was going down here. So as I was trying to grab it, I couldn't, and I fell down a crevasse. And I just remember my sort of last thought, or what I thought would be my last thought, was that I hope I'm going to die immediately rather than just stay there for like 8 hours.
Yeah.
Basically, I fell down, but I managed to land on a sort of snow bridge. This is why I was jumping in that place. I mean, it was all together a stupid thing to do, but like I did take some precautions. So I was jumping above some snow bridge that I saw. I landed on that snow bridge, and miraculously enough, it supported me. So here I am. I'm alive. Nothing happened to me. I'm just stuck in a crevasse. Well, not stuck physically. It was wide enough.
It was wide, yeah.
To breathe and so on. Because you know what happens is if you fall down a crevasse, most of people just get strangled.
Yeah.
inside them as it sort of squeezes their chest. So this one was wide enough. I landed on that snow bridge, but here I have like 5 meters of vertical ice to get out, right?
Oh my God.
But it wasn't that wide, so I was able to spread my legs and arms and just stick my crampons into the ice and just climb out like this.
Oh my goodness.
And it was turning quite funny because, okay, here I am, widespread in the mouth of the crevasse. I can already see the world.
Yeah. You're stretched apart like a starfish.
Yeah, it's like, so what do I do now? So I thought, okay, well, fair enough. This hand has to go here while this leg goes there. So now I'm stretched like this, not like a starfish anymore.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll have to do what the penguins do, which is, when they jump out of the water. So basically, I thought that I would have to climb as high up as I can with my legs.
Yeah.
And then just propel myself out.
Yeah.
Which worked. It must have been quite funny at that stage because that just before I jumped, the only thing you could see above the glacier was my bum sticking. But anyway, so I pulled myself as far back as I could, then jumped as far as I could, and sure enough, I did fly out from that crevasse. But as you can imagine, I had a rather strong motivation, so I really did use all my strength. So I flew out, and I started sliding down the glacier very, very rapidly.
No!
Because obviously I was jumping out to on the downwards direction, right?
Yeah.
So at this stage, I remember laughing hysterically because I could see another crevasse approaching very, very quickly, and I couldn't brake. And I was laughing because that would be the stupidest way to die ever, because this time I would be falling down the crevasse head first, right? Oh. And I had no idea if there was a snow bridge or not. Anyway, somehow I did manage to brake with my crampons and my claws, basically. So I stopped, like half my body was already hanging in the other crevasse, but here I am, I'm still alive. I got up, but I'm still on the wrong side of the crevasse.
Right.
And the next attempt was more successful. So I managed to jump across it. And then I walked back to the other side of the glacier, at which point humbly I called my people and asked them to lower a boat. And like walking across the glacier only requires 2 people to be bothered. Launching a boat is more or less for everybody, because we need to take it from the industrial hall. So you need a tractor, you need a slip, you need a lot of equipment and a lot of people involved. But I asked for it, and they came with the boat and picked me up. So by my own stupidity and arrogance, I almost killed myself. Yes.
Wow, you must have been so shaken by the time you called for that boat.
Actually, strangely enough, I wasn't. The funny thing when you're dying is, this is one thing I realized there, is I personally have never died before, right? So basically my own experience teaches me that I'm immortal because I've never died, right? So when I was there, like just before I slipped down or sliding down already and falling down that crevasse, I couldn't really relate to that situation. It was as if I was watching a movie or something. I knew it was me in a way, but at the same time, my instincts were... So I wasn't even worried. The thought that I would die immediately was rather a conscious thought than an instinct. I just knew that it was me who was falling down the crevasse, but I had to constantly keep reminding myself about that. And also you have the adrenaline rush, you have all sorts of things that are happening. So I was actually very calm in the crevasse. I started shaking when I got on that boat and back in the station. But during the whole event, I was not. I was very rational.
Wow. What an amazing experience.
Yeah, but really, I almost died because I'm stupid, That's the bottom line.
Yeah, but at least it's not going to happen a second time, right? I mean,
no.
You learned that lesson once. And
yeah, I did, yes. Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully, yeah. Wow, crazy. Okay, so I want to basically wrap up on that note because that's such an amazing story. But I do have 2 very brief questions I want to ask you as well. What about the reality of living and working on an Antarctic base is something that lay people would never imagine? Like, what's a random fact that only base people know or experience?
Well, one of those things is the money story that I told you. You forget about it. And I'm told that because, one of the great things about our line of work when we work on the expedition ships is that we meet people who also had similar experiences at different bases. And apparently this is absolutely commonplace. This is what happens. When you return from Antarctica, you forget that there is such thing as money. So apparently in Hobart, the shop owners and the pub owners are used to the fact that the people returning from Antarctica forget to pay, and they don't even get upset about it because they know that this is the case, and they have like signs reminding them this is reality, you need to pay.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And another thing is that probably when you're planning an expedition that's so long and you won't have any shops, you really need to think how much personal stuff you'll be using. It has changed, but I think that Polish Academy of Sciences realized maybe about 10 years ago that half of the population are actually females, and that means that they would require certain sanitary products during the expedition. Yeah. However, before that, it was not the case. I don't think they realized that people were females sometimes. So like I had to think before my first expedition, I had to think, well, how many shampoos I'm going to use, how many deodorants I'm going to use, how many shower gels, how much alcohol I'm going to use, things like this throughout the year. My female colleagues also had to worry about how many sanitary products they're going to use during the whole year. So this is the interesting thing, because normally we don't really pay attention to it. You know, we are used to the fact that, oh, if it runs out, I'll go to the shop and I get myself a new one. No, there's no shop. Nowadays, it's a bit better because from what I'm told, we were only provided of the sanitary products, we were only provided bars of soap, toothbrushes, toothpaste, and toilet paper. That was it. Wow. So everything else you needed to bring with yourself to make sure that it will last you a year.
Yeah, that's pretty basic.
Yeah. But I think that from what I'm told, the situation has improved slightly. So that's another thing that you probably wouldn't expect when you're going to the station. In some places, well, in the past, it was obvious that people going to work at the station have to have their appendix removed and their wisdom teeth as well. Nowadays, it's not the case. Another thing that's not obvious, but it's not just for lay people, I would say. It's also for people who go to the station for the first time. As the expedition that I was leading was the fourth one I had, which means that with the three previous ones, I'd seen it happen a lot. So I already knew about it, but I also spoke to other base commanders, and they said it's exactly the same at every station. There's always a bit of a friction between the scientific personnel and the technical personnel.
Right.
Because scientists quite often tend to be about a bit arrogant, I would say, to put it mildly. Basically, they expect the technicians to be their servants at every time, just dumping everything and just to help them to collect samples or prepare some special equipment or whatever, right? So, and the scientists don't realize or don't remember that without the technicians, they would be dead within 24 hours because they're bloody useless.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you've got the technicians who think that the scientists are taking them away from the really important work that they have. Like they need to repair the electric installation or the pipe work for the station. And here there are these scientists asking them to help them collect some ridiculous samples of something that you can't even see with your naked eye, so it probably doesn't exist, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But what they forget instead is that if it wasn't for the scientists, the station wouldn't be there in the first place. So yes, their work is super important, but it's a scientific station. So basically, there is a bit of a tension between these two teams, and I think this was one of the first things I told my people, look, we are really one team. You wouldn't be here without us. We wouldn't be alive without you. It's simple as that. We all rely upon each other. So this is something that everybody needs to realize in their heads.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think it's a lesson for life in general, right? I mean, we all need to be more tolerant of each other, because we're interdependent, whether we like it or not. Yeah, awesome. Okay, last question. Is there any project or cause or anything that's close to your heart that you want to give a shout out to here on the podcast?
Yes, there is this absolutely wonderful lady called Greta Thunberg. That I support so strongly. I think that if anybody is going to save this planet, it's her. I think if there is hope for the future, the hope is wearing funny plats, and she's just doing an absolutely amazing thing. And I think She easily is one of the most important people of the 21st century, in my opinion. And if there is a future for humanity, the history books in the future will list her as such. She's an absolutely amazing human being, and I so strongly support her. I cannot even say how much.
And so for anyone who's unfamiliar with her, she's the Swedish teenager who's currently doing a school strike that's all geared towards creating awareness around everything, basically. He's trying to save the planet, to put it in a nutshell.
But it's not just an awareness, we're good at raising awareness, and what does it change? Nothing. But she's so efficient, she's so focused that she already guaranteed or secured the promise from the European Union that they will, in fact, spend like 1/4 of their budget in the coming years on mitigating the climate change, which is absolutely amazing. So she's super efficient also, and very, very focused, and I absolutely completely admire her.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link to some of the, if she has a TED Talk, there's a few different things out there that can kind of help people understand what she's up to. We'll link to that in the show notes in the podcast.
And the speeches at the UN and the European Union and Davos, everywhere.
Really inspiring
Have you
stuff.
seen that photo? I think that the photo that I have always on my mind is when she met Jane Goodall in Davos.
I don't think I've seen that.
And there's this absolutely wonderful photo, one of the most powerful images I can think of, when they both look at each other with absolute love and admiration, because obviously Jane Goodall is an icon, but this young girl is an icon as well. And you can see the mutual respect, the mutual love and support, and seeing them two on a photo just absolutely overwhelms me.
That's amazing. I'll definitely try to link to that photo as well then. And thank you for bringing that to the listeners' attention. That's great. And thank you so much for your time and your stories. This is really wonderful stuff. And you're letting us look through a window into the world that you've lived in. And most people could never even possibly imagine what that's like. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and all the best.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Antarctic Stories. If you like the stories we bring to you, please subscribe for future episodes. And if you want to help the podcast, leaving a rating or review greatly assists us in reaching a wider audience. AntArctic Stories is a production of Twin Tracks Expeditions, your experts in small ship expedition cruises to the Arctic and Antarctica. We love sharing our insider knowledge to help you find the perfect ship for your next polar expedition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or at twintracksexpeditions.com.